Okay, this is a review of Camera Raw for the initial editing of your final photo for your turn-in assignment. In class, I went through the process of opening and reconfiguring Adobe Bridge to view your raw camera images and then use Bridge as a launchpad for Adobe Camera Raw. Then after we edited the image, I showed you how to open it in Photoshop and save the image as a Photoshop or PSD file. We started by finding the Start button in the lower left corner of the screen and selected Adobe Bridge from the list. After we select all programs, we go to Adobe Bridge and open it up. The default workspace opens up initially, but like I demonstrated in class, I like to reorganize the workspace to suit my personal needs. To do that, I start by up here maximizing the screen. And then I'm just going to come over here to the left side of the screen in the middle, right in between the panes. I'm going to pull this down a little bit, and I'm going to click in between these two panes vertically and just drag my left column over, make it a little bit narrower. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to squeeze the center column down so that I get actually a second column on the left side here. That leaves me this big open space divided in half approximately, but I'm going to come here and just bring this one down. Now I have this really nice big image viewing area. So to that end, I think we're going to start now by making a shortcut. I did talk about making a shortcut in here to your folder. So to get to your folder, you have to navigate to the folder. We're going to start with going to the G drive. So I double click on the G drive. From there, we are going to go to Teachers and Students, which is right here. Double click on Teachers and Students. Then we'll go to My Drive, which is Kostrowski Randy. Coming, there it is. And now inside this folder is the class folder. So whichever your class is, it'll be an Intro to Photo class. Whichever block in this particular instance that I'm making it for is going to be block quarter 4, block 2. So we'll just make a shortcut. So we simply do it the same way we did it in Windows Explorer. We simply click on it and drag up. From this point, we go to our project folder or our topic folder, and we can look at all the images that are in that folder. After you get done shooting your assignment, you'll come back and put your 6 images minimum into that folder. And then from here, the reason we are using Adobe Bridge is we can click on an image to see the whole image, which is great, but we can also from here launch Camera Raw. So if I right click on the image, I can either right click on it here, or I can come over here and right click and Camera Raw appears. It says open image or open in Camera Raw. So I can click on the image and I want to open it in Camera Raw. So we'll do that. Camera Raw opens up. This is the Camera Raw workspace. We are going to be focusing on primarily these 6 sliders that are right here on the right hand side of the screen. I strongly recommend that when you open up your original image in Camera Raw, the first thing you do is come up here to the Auto button right here. Click on the Auto button and it will make some basic changes. This is a baseline. What it does is that you can see that all of these sliders over here on the right side, these 6 sliders, have all been kind of readjusted. Adobe Camera Raw decides that this is a good starting place for your editing. I'm going to talk about each slider individually, starting with the exposure slider, which is right here. On the right is highlight, on the left is shadows, and what you want is an exposure that lands somewhere in between that gives you a pretty good general photo. It globally controls your total exposure. If you take it too far to the left, you're going to underexpose it by a lot. If you take it too far to the right, you're going to overexpose it by a lot. So we want our exposure to be kind of averaged right in there. And that's a good place to start right there. The next slider down is the contrast slider. This is your difference between black and white and gray. If you've got a low contrast photo, you tend to have gray shades. We don't have a real black and we don't have a real white. It's just a kind of a general shading of really kind of soft colors in between that. If we take the contrast slider far to the right, now we've got extreme contrast where we've got really blacks, we've got really whites, that don't show much detail in either, but at the same time we've got very harsh tonal range in there where there's not a nice blending of the tone. We want a little bit higher in contrast because we want some snap to our photo. We want it to kind of pop out a little bit. We don't want it to just be dull. We'd like it to be kind of nice and sharp. So contrast and exposure kind of work together. They seem to be kind of the same thing, but the exposure doesn't really separate your tones like the contrast does. Now, down below, we've got these other 4 sliders, and they are going to be like fine tuning the contrast. This contrast slider, the second slider down, is kind of a global adjustment. It kind of adjusts everything together. It adjusts the highlights and shadows all together and the mid-tone ranges. So that's kind of a global or just general setting as well. The highlight slider allows you to adjust just the highlights. So if we take the highlights way down, we've got a really, instead of a white line here, we have a really kind of a gray line. We don't have really white clouds. We're not seeing much detail in our highlights. If we slide it far to the right, again, we get kind of the same thing, except on the opposite end, we get too bright highlights. We want to kind of average our highlights out so that we have detail like this in the sky. We have some detail in our white line, but we also still have plenty of white in there, so it's bright enough. So if I turn my highlights up just a little bit, I can brighten that image up, brighten the highlights up, so we can still see detail. That's the important thing. But we've got nice bright highlights. Next one down is the shadows. We can control those individually. If we take them way down, we tend to have really dark areas in the image that have no detail in them, but we want detail in the shadows. If we take it all the way up, then we've kind of opened up the shadows a lot. We don't really have then really accurate shadows, so we want to have it somewhere in between. We want to have some shadows, right? We want to have we want it to be able to see shadows, but we want to also be able to see some detail in the shadows. So you can adjust the shadows back and forth. Now once you get done with those two, if you want to go back to the contrast, the global contrast, and tweak it just a little bit, you can kind of do that. Or you can go back to your highlights. If you think you need to tweak the highlights just a little bit, you can do that. Whites and blacks are whites and blacks, so they're the actual colors. So if I go here, you can see where I can make my whites white and I can make my whites gray. Well, we don't want gray whites, we want white whites, but we have to kind of balance that with our highlights because the whites are generally falling in the highlight areas, and so we kind of balance our whites with the highlights. It helps us give a little more snap to our highlights without losing the detail. Same thing with blacks. We want to have good blacks, but we don't want so dark of blacks that we just kind of lose again detail in our shadow areas. So we want to have blacks that will still give us details, but will also create that separation of tones that we want. So those are our 6 sliders to do the very basic editing that we need to do in our images. The bottom 3 sliders, you can try them, you can use them, but use them sparingly. You want to be really careful about how you use these. Let's talk about the clarity real quick. The clarity deals primarily with the midtones, not with the highlights or shadows so much, but with the midtones. And if I click and drag it to the left, you'll see my image gets very soft. For some purposes, that might be very good, but for this particular purpose, I don't think soft is what we're looking for. We want to really get some good details in the midtones as well, so we're going to keep it somewhere in the middle. Now, if we take it too far to the right, we get this really sharpening effect going on with really hard edges around our details, and we don't really want that either. We want to keep it somewhere in between so that we maintain good detail, but without overdoing it. So vibrance then is the brightness of the color. Okay, so we've got, if I take it way to the right, I've been just brightened the colors up significantly, too much really. And if I take it all the way down, I've muted the colors a lot. Now, their colors are still there. I still see some green, some red, and a little bit of brown in there, but they're very muted colors. Okay, a little bit of blue in the garbage can. So if I take it back to the middle somewhere, now you can see that we have really nice colors. What we want is we want the colors to look realistic. We want this image to look like the scene did when we went out to take the photo. Okay, and saturation then is the amount of color. So the saturation slider on the bottom, that's how much color there is. So if I take it down to the left, I've taken all the color out. There's no color. It's just grayscale. It's black, gray, and white. All right. If I take it all the way to the right, I've really saturated the colors, so they're really deep, really color rich, but that doesn't look normal either. It doesn't look natural. It doesn't look the way it's supposed to. So we can use this color slider to bring the colors back in a little, make sure we get nice rich colors, and that looks pretty good. So that's about where I'm going to leave it. So I'm really kind of done editing this image. If you want to check to make sure, if you want to kind of compare it to what it used to look like, you can come down here to this little Y. If I click on that little Y button, you'll see that here's the original image right here, and here's the one I've fixed. If you look up above, it says before and it says after. So before editing and after editing. Now I hope you'll agree that this after editing image looks a lot better. The other thing, if you click on this Y again, you'll get it. It will split the image and show you the before and after right next to each other as part of the same image. And you can click on it again. It'll show you from top to bottom. And once again, it'll split it across the middle. It's not quite as evident here, but it splits it right across the middle. And then one more time, and that takes us back to our edited image. All right, so once we're done with our edits, which I think we're done here, looks pretty good, we come down here. This is an important step. We come down to the open image. That's our next step. So we click on the open image, and what it'll do is it opens up Adobe Photoshop, and it opens up our corrected image, okay, with all of the adjustments already made. And here it is. It's already done. So all we're doing in Photoshop then, once the image opens up in Photoshop, all we want to do is go to the File menu, click on that, come down to the File Save As, and then that's where you'll name it. Now, what you'll do is you'll name it your last name, comma, first name, dash. In this case, it's shooting on a surface, so we'll just call it dash surface, and put it into your folder on the G drive, into your folder, into that particular project folder. Once you get done naming it and saving it in there, all right, close out of both these programs, and then just copy that file from your folder into the Turn-In folder. Now before we close these programs, there's a couple things I want to do, and that is I want to come down here to my taskbar where I've got these little icons down here. Okay, here's my Photoshop icon. I'm going to right click on the Photoshop icon, and right here it says pin this program to taskbar. So I'm going to click on that because I want this little icon to be down in my taskbar so I don't have to go through the Start menu, All Programs, Adobe Photoshop to open up Photoshop. I'm going to also do the same thing with Adobe Bridge. If I right click on the Adobe Bridge icon, you'll see you can pin this program to taskbar. I'm going to click on that, and now I've got both of these programs pinned to my taskbar. So when I close it, I'm going to close Photoshop, and I'm going to say no to save this one. I'm going to click and I'm going to close Bridge. Now, when I come down to my taskbar, those icons appear there. So in order to open up either one of those, I can simply click on it, and it will open it up. So I don't have to go through the Start menu and the other programs. So that's all I have for this particular episode. Happy editing.